Okay, now we're going to have some fun and hopefully continue to learn a lot. We've assembled an absolutely first-rate panel of 7 distinguished folks to address a very interesting and a question that's enormously pertinent to us at MIT, which is how should MIT as an institution advance the whole issue of science, in particular in this climate arena? Arguably, you've all been part of the very first step in this process today. You've all heard lots of very interesting talks about things going on here, mostly at this institution, that are advancing our understanding and our ability to deal with climate change. And this is an attempt to put these things together in some way. And so part of the issue before us is how can we take that a step further? Another part of that issue is how or should MIT as an institution do something in this arena? For example, we've heard some today, including just now by Justin Gillis, the problem of campaigns of disinformation. A lot of us here at the Institute as individual scientists, engineers, try to fight this, but we aren't doing anything really so far at the institutional level for that. So here's how things are going to work. I'm not going to reintroduce the panel because they've all been introduced to you individually before, and I don't want to take up the time, but I've asked each of the panelists to give maybe a 1 to 3 minute take on this without visuals, just their own view of this. And that will take up a little less than half of the hour we have available to us. And then we're going to open it up to questions from you. And the way we decided to do that, we're MIT, we're trying to use advanced techniques, is you have essentially 3 ways of posing a question to us. And one of them is to text it, and there's an instruction for how you do that. Those messages will come to me, okay? In fact, they all will. You can do it via the web, or you can email us. And I will screen those questions, and I will favor those that are relevant to the point and pithy, okay? So try not to engage in long monologues by email. And we'll try to work it that way and see how it goes. Now, I'm fully aware that there are some people in the audience perhaps who don't have the means to do this, and I would suggest that you lean over to another member of the audience, particularly if they're young, and ask if you could do it through them, okay? So with that, we'll proceed, and I'll ask Justin Gillis to begin.
Since I just had a long say, why don't I pass, and we'll use the time and let Valerie start, and then I'll be happy to respond to questions.
Great, thank you. So I would say that as representatives of MIT, one of the most important things that we can do on this issue is really to go out and to listen in multiple senses. So I think the listening that we do takes essentially 3 forms. One is going out and listening to the key stakeholders, particularly in the emerging world, which have such a strong and important stake and role to play in mitigation and adaptation efforts at the global level. So talking to people in those governments, trying to understand what it is that they face in terms of data challenges, in terms of policy design challenges, and then as we come back to MIT and discuss how we think about approaching our research, we will have in mind a kind of on-the-ground feel for what the challenges are and what types of analysis can be valuable in those contexts. I also think listening can happen in 2 additional senses that are very important. One is, I think, in terms of our public communication around climate change, I think we need to talk to skeptics. We may not even want to call them skeptics. We may want to call them people first and then think about them in terms of the opinions they hold. And in doing this, I think we actually start to build bridges rather than create divisions that have been so have proven so detrimental to constructive across the dialogue, across party lines types of discussions in this country and in other places. And then finally, I think listening just has to happen more internally across all of the people here at MIT who are doing really terrific work on climate change, trying to move these agendas forward, and take stock of all that we're doing, appreciate all that we're doing, and then find ways of synthesizing that in maybe it's loose networks, maybe it's ways of communicating all that we're doing in some coherent way to the wider world. And that's something I'm still thinking hard about how to do, and look forward to joining you all in that challenge.
Good afternoon. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to take the opportunity here to let you know that we can continue the fun of this event on Friday. We are having a climate hackathon in room 7429. It's for the MIT community. Please join us. The Climate Collab and the Environmental Solutions Initiative we're holding a day-long event. Professors are going to act as coaches on brainstorming and developing ideas from all those who participate and attend on climate action. So please join us. It should be a lot of fun and productive. Okay, so with the remaining half minute, so I have had the privilege as the new director of the Environmental Solutions Initiative of listening and traveling around the Institute, convening groups, sitting with labs, individuals, departments, deans to talk about what MIT should be doing through the environment, through ESI, in a variety of ways on environmental issues, climate science being just one of them. So I'd like to suggest that first of all, there are many individuals in labs and centers and departments who are very engaged with the real world. I think part of my role will be to forefront that engagement. It's distributed, it's department lab centric, typically, but the sum of those parts is pretty extraordinary. And so bringing them all together and coordinating them for greater effect that MIT has in taking action on climate change, I think is an important thing to do. So my suggestion is that we could hold an event, maybe a series of events, around environmental change, and I'm talking about environmental change, not just climate change, has to do with a catastrophic or very difficult situation, urban pollution, sudden sea level rise, environmental agent proliferation and disease, so a scenario in which the multiple disciplines that come out of the 5 schools at MIT can then participate in a kind of war game scenario. So play out scenarios. There's no better way of communicating what the universities and what different disciplines' role can be by just playing it out. And this is something I'm going to be suggesting and moving forward with, and I hope you and the rest of the MIT community would be interested in joining. Thank you.
So I guess I'm the representative of people who sort of work on energy solutions. And the one thing that strikes me is avoiding what I'm an empiricist because I'm a scientist, and I keep getting struck by we have to keep don't do what hasn't worked, and when I see and what hasn't worked is a little bit to what Justin had said, is that I have sort of this cartoon in my head of Professor Genius who goes into his lab and he makes this perfect energy source that no one will ever use because it's perfect in his own mind in a scientific way. And I have that cartoon because I worried that was me working on fusion. And so part of this is that what MIT, which I think it is doing, but we need to keep thinking about what this means as we evolve the low carbon energy centers, is to start placing our work in energy sources and energy distribution and storage in a much larger context of all of the things that you heard today, which include the societal, economic aspects of what's going on. Because if you just do this work in isolation, I think that we are seeing that it's not necessarily very effective, actually, about that enormous lift we have about moving to a low carbon energy economy. So in that sense, it's sort of a little bit to what John is saying, I think everyone's saying, it's engagement. It's engagement across disciplines which are not used to necessarily talking to each other on a regular basis. As physicists working on a advanced nuclear energy source, we're not used to talking to sociologists, but it is actually really important. And I guess what I would just urge is that I know there's been a variety of reactions to the MIT climate change plan. I would just say is that please don't, because I'm going to be engaged heavily in those as the low carbon energy centers, is don't think of these as isolated research as usual going on. This is now a new opportunity for actually engagement of the entire community, in fact, and about how we actually solve the problem. So thank you.
I think a theme is developing. My sense is MIT has underinvested in the pedagogy of science communication. I mean, I know we have a science writing program, and I think that's wonderful, but in a sense, that grows out of a theory that we need intermediaries between scientists and the public, and if only the journalists would please do our work for us and figure out how to communicate it, then all that brilliant scientific work would get communicated. And while I think listening's important, I think there's a big problem with the fact that a very large number of the faculty are silent in teaching or modeling for their own students what their theory of practice is with regard to science communication. In other words, I work not just at MIT, but I work elsewhere as a mediator in complicated disputes. I'm often in science-intensive disputes between what you use to describe people as non-believers or skeptics. I'm often in the middle in community settings because we try to involve everybody in the community. And so you get, if you're successful, people with very, very different ways of framing and understanding things. I think if there's anybody who's studying science or engineering here who doesn't end up with a very explicit personal theory of practice about how they're going to communicate their science to non-scientists and to people in other disciplines, then we have failed as a teaching institution. And unfortunately, I don't think very many faculty could tell you what it is they would teach with regard to how this should happen. We're just holding out hope that some intermediaries, the AAAS model, that some intermediaries will emerge who will be science communicators. Oh, and maybe MIT can train them too. But I don't think that's it. I think it's a very, very serious problem of learning how to communicate not just across disciplines, but with all kinds of publics, both in an off-the-cuff way, but also in writing. And if people aren't able to write an op-ed, if they aren't able to put in a blog something that someone can understand about a complex issue that they are totally expert on, there's something very wrong.
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder to think of new things to say, but I would like to see, and in many ways this is already in the climate action plan, but I would like to see MIT take a serious effort at answering the question, is this 2-degree target achievable? Or what do we need to do to change the way we do things now to make it achievable? That's a really worthwhile goal. And we have, here at MIT, pretty much all of the expertise needed, and we can draw upon it elsewhere. Let me just say something on the natural sciences side, looking at the 2 degrees. It's already been mentioned by several people, including in my talk, that the climate response has got significant uncertainty. And there's a misconception about climate response versus climate sensitivity. Sensitivity is an equilibrium notion, and pretty much we're going to be transient. Temperatures are going to go up and down and so on. And you've got to think of the other 2 things that are really important beyond climate sensitivity. Those are the ocean heat and carbon sink and the role of aerosols. Now, we've all heard, and Justin Gillis reminded us, that we haven't done much to lower the uncertainty range in climate sensitivity. And many reasons for that. We happen to be in a transient climate and trying to tell what the sensitivity is buried in there. But I think we can do more on the other two fronts of big scientific uncertainty in climate response, which I take as the response in a transient climate. And that is to look at these other two things: the role of the ocean in taking up carbon and heat, and the role of aerosols in cooling or warming the world. Getting those uncertainties down then helps define the pathway, because right now, with the response, in fact, having about a factor of 3 effect on the costs, because the higher the response, the higher the cost it's going to be to transform the energy system. You've got to do it faster and faster, the higher the climate response. So, and the other thing I would emphasize in looking at the 2-degree goal is we also need to think about lowering the costs of these low and zero energy technologies. The lower that cost gets, the less it costs for the world to make the transition. So for the engineering challenge for these low-cost carbon centers is, don't just think about, is it neat and feasible? How can you get the cost so it's not just affordable in California or in New England, but how can it be affordable in China, India, and so on? And that's got to be part of it as well. I don't know whether we can achieve the 2-degree target. It is very challenging. But I think it's an ideal thing for MIT to take that on to answer the question, is it possible? And can we make it possible? If it isn't currently possible with what we know, what do we need to do to make it possible on the technology side and on the science side? Thanks.
So I'd like to begin by reminding everyone one of the most significant agreements to date that has limited warming was the Montreal Protocol that limited CFCs. And that from the beginning was not a given. There was opposition to it with people questioning the science and questioning whether limiting the connection between CFCs and the ozone hole, while DuPont quietly worked on an alternative to Freon. And once that alternative was available, such that people didn't have to change how they lived their lives, the Montreal Protocol was quickly signed. So that leads me to my main point. I think that looking for solutions to our dependence on fossil fuels, affordable solutions that don't make people change the way they live their lives in horrible ways such that they can't imagine life going on as they know it, is something that MIT has the great strength to do. And to do it, MIT has to start attacking this problem at an enterprise level. MIT has great strengths in geosciences, across all of the engineering, in urban planning, in transportation, in energy, in economics, in business. They've got excellence in all of these areas, but it's time to roll that all up together, because just as Dennis said, you can't get affordable solutions that society is going to embrace unless MIT starts acting as an enterprise to develop those solutions.
Good. Well, thank you very much. And I have to say I've been up here absolutely overwhelmed by some really good questions. And if I don't ask yours, I apologize. A lot of the questions address the general problem of climate. They're very good questions there, but we are really here to talk about what MIT's role, and so I've tried to be a bit selective about that. So the first question that I'll take from the ones that I've got is simply this. MIT, many of you are aware, issued in October its climate action plan in response to a report from a committee of faculty, staff, and students, which I was on, about what MIT's role should be. And I think some of the panelists, anyway, are familiar with that plan. They may not all be, but I'll pose the question that was posed to me: is MIT's climate action plan sufficient? Why or why not?
No.
Okay, John.
So I'll dive into that. So I want to take one little piece of it, actually two pieces. So the first piece is on buildings, the 32% energy reduction. So I'm an architect, I'm a building, very recently formerly head of the building technology program here. We have a world-class building technology program. The 32% is aspirational, and the statement from the upper administration in a faculty meeting and my concurrence is that we can do better than that. So the fact is, let's just do it. I mean, the point I'm making is that the document is a document in time written at one point. No one's going to say, "Oh, we got 32%, time to stop," right? So that's my main point on the second thing I want to. And that's really just on the building side because I'm an architect and building technology person. One other thing I want to say on the climate action or what MIT should be doing is that the solutions part. Solutions has been mentioned many times today. The name of the initiative I'm directing is the Environmental Solutions Initiative. And I think it's really important to broaden the notion of solutions. I absolutely believe that technology breakthroughs with cost reductions and innovation, and essentially market uptake, absolutely essential. The other part of solutions that the university has a extraordinary footprint or an extraordinary ability to create and mobilize is that providing educational opportunities on the best quality climate science and other environmental topics, giving students here at MIT hands-on opportunities to apply that knowledge, having a career path so that they decide that it's worthwhile taking a climate science or other environmental topic, and building environmental literacy in the student bodies here, undergraduate and graduate, is extraordinarily important because the solutions that come out of that is that once they leave here, they're only here for 4 years, the undergrads. Once they leave, they continue on with that work because it's obvious this is not a 4-year problem, right? This is a multi-decadal problem. So that's the solutions part that I think MIT can do a lot more about and that we will be doing through the ESI and other programs here at MIT.
Anyone else? Yes, Ron?
Yeah, I would add that looking at the climate plan, that there needs to be a better appreciation of the role of the natural sciences that still remains, even in looking at the solution. In my talk today, I made the point that planning a pathway towards 2 degrees, we have this big uncertainty in the climate response. And I think somehow we need to do more on that front than is hinted at in the climate action plan. The science is not all settled in the sense of sufficient accuracy to guide the pathway to the future. So we should continue on that front and make it clear that that is part of the solution going forward. Did you want to say anything?
So, Valerie.
Was the question, is the plan sufficient or efficient?
The question was worded, is it sufficient, why or why not?
Okay, on the efficiency question, I had carbon tax ready as an answer, but I guess just very briefly on that, I guess, I would say, I think particularly on the issue of fossil-free MIT, I was in the plan, I think one element that might have liked to have seen was actually thinking about innovative ways of ways that the campus could use carbon pricing in the evaluation of investment opportunities. And so I would have liked to have seen a little bit more nuance and perhaps some attention to efficient, even if perhaps too idealistic solutions.
Okay. Yes.
I gather that on this divestment issue, that was a part of the request from the students that the administration turned down last year. And my impression is the MIT board considers that a final decision. The students apparently do not, some of them, and are sort of making that point with their bodies. A lot of the resistance among institutions to divestment, to the divestment question, has been to sort of throw up their hands and say, how are we supposed to judge this? You know, what's a good fossil fuel company? What's a bad fossil fuel company? And so it's kind of this tension between divestment versus engagement, and people are trying to navigate that boundary right now. We've got a lot of interesting engagement stuff going on, demands from the shareholders of these companies. This is about to get a lot more interesting because there's a group at Oxford, and I believe some people from Harvard are participating in this. Dan Schrag from Harvard, I'm pretty sure, is involved. They are looking at, if those in the audience who are old enough to remember the South Africa divestment debate a generation ago, there was something called the Sullivan Principles, devised by a minister named Leon Sullivan in Philadelphia. This was a strong set of principles about how you get yourself out of the doghouse if you're a company, what you need to do in South Africa to not be on the divestment list. So people are now, the climate divestment movement has not had that. People are now working on that. This Oxford-Harvard project has come out already with a preliminary list of what they think the standards should be. I think right now all of the fossil fuel companies would fail that standard. But the point is to get them to sort of, the explicit idea is this problem is not going to be solved without investment in the solutions from this best capitalized of all industries, right? And so the things on this list are, do you agree, kind of a checklist, do you agree with climate science? Do you agree with the 2C goal? What's your plan for getting to zero net emissions by the time of meeting the 2C goal? How much are you investing? How rapidly are you going to ramp down looking for new fossil fuel resources that we cannot afford to burn? So while the Institute's board might think it has made a final decision, I would predict that there's going to be a very different conversation when this thing comes out, which is supposed to be in, I think, the September-October timeframe.
I think that's a good lead into another question that was posed by some of you, or perhaps part of the virtual audience, which is that one part of MIT, the proposal we made to MIT, is that, like many other institutions, we establish an investment ethics advisory council, just so that there's community input to the sorts of questions we were just talking about. And the question is, why did they turn us down, and what do you think of that? So if there's anyone on the panel who has an opinion about that, go for it. Looks like a third rail to me. Okay, we'll move right along to the next question then.
They didn't ask us.
I would venture to say that we didn't make that decision, so maybe we're not the people to ask.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
We were not consulted.
All right. This question I'm going to ask seems tailor-made for one of our panelists. The questioner says we can only get up to about 20% with renewables, barring some breakthrough in energy storage and transmission technology. How can MIT convince the skeptical public of the need to and the virtues of having nuclear power?
No, that's you, isn't it? No. Yeah, we know right. So it is. Part of it is simply communication. There was sort of I heard the question that came from the back. There was sort of a surprise that that nuclear energy was at that low part of the thing in terms of in terms of mortality rates. So part of it is communication, but and we've had many discussions about this as well too, Kerry, is that you have to remember the plot that I showed, actually, which was the deployment of nuclear energy actually was rapid and was accepted by society. But it was the date. That's 60-year-old technology. And there's exactly the same technology in place right now in the reactors that we build, and I'm talking about fission. So part of this is also understanding that there's an enormous spectrum of options which actually relieve our societal and economic anxieties actually about using nuclear energy on a much larger scale. Those are not coming into place fast enough, and that's actually part of what I believe the low carbon centers and a broader activity actually has to occur for that to happen. So it's sort of do the math. I mean, if you can't come up with a breakthrough that we don't see yet in actually energy storage or much more efficient transmission, then that's the option on the table. And I'll just make one plug. We can go all the way. We seriously underinvest in a form of nuclear energy which actually does address essentially society's concerns, which is fusion. But in fact, we're not even close to making the investment that's required, in fact, to make that a reality as an economic energy source. So that's why one plug for fusion.
Ron.
Yeah. I was going to say, and I agree with Dennis. It turns out his analysis looks rather similar to the one I presented from a totally different approach. There's no doubt that renewables, which I defined as wind, solar, biomass, biofuels, and so on, but also hydro and nuclear, have got to become the major parts of the energy system. No matter whether the climate response is high, low, medium, that result was robust, that you had to keep all of those. Add in geothermal and other ones that weren't mentioned there, and my view is everything's got to be on the table, and I personally think it's going to be a competition for who can produce low to zero emission energy at the cheapest cost. Those technologies will be the ones that will win, and also different mixes will win in different parts of the world. Certainly that's the work that we've done so far. It's not one solution for the world, but what I was showing you was a sum of all of them, but there'll be different approaches in each part of the world. But there's no doubt that somehow we've got to get these electric power, for example, coming from these low to zero emitting options as soon as we can, and that means make them affordable.
Okay, Larry?
Yeah, I just want to note a point of caution. I mean, I agree it would be great if MIT can help to either generate new technologies or new ways of using old technologies that can move us toward renewables of various kinds. But I spent a lot of time working in Chile trying to stop Hidroisen, which is a very, very large hydro project, which was proposed to serve a national effort to have enough energy. It's a country with not going to have nuclear because there's too many earthquakes, and it's not going to have, it has no oil, has no gas, doesn't want to take any more gas from Argentina for a whole series of good reasons, and so decided hydro, except the hydro they were proposing was 1,000 miles away from the capital and going to go through the land of the Mapuche people, and there were no consultation, no consideration, no social impact assessment, meager environmental impact assessment, and any site-specific decisions, whether they're nuclear or anything else, can't just be pursued in the name of getting to 2%. I mean, there are too many to 2 degrees. There's just too many trade-offs that have to be made explicit, and that people in those places have to have opportunities to participate in the discussion. So it can't just be the most efficient method in theory for how to do this. All of the site-specific, context-specific, social, political, and economic concerns have got to be debated, discussed, and decided in ways that are consultative with regard to the people who are affected. So I don't want MIT to just be lined up behind technology solutions and to lose sight of the fact that also at MIT we teach people how to participate in place-specific decisions, how to engage people, how to balance all these kinds of considerations.
Okay. Marcia.
Yeah, I think what Larry just said is a very good example that really all energy solutions that are on the table have impacts. Solar has impact, wind has impact, nuclear has impact, even geothermal has impact. It induces earthquakes. So I think it's important in this enterprise solution approach that MIT takes that all of these impacts are weighed and they are all taken into account. And I think that climate is one of the issues in terms of CO2, and all of this has to be weighed, measured, considered, and then decided on what's the best way forward. And that's why sometimes one might decide that solar panels on homes, because it's already disturbed space, is the best way to go, whereas sometimes industrial scale solar is the best way to go, and it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Okay, I think in the interest of diversity of topics, we'll move on to another question. But it's related, of course. That is, it's been discussed here earlier today that to really alleviate the risk, we are collectively going to need to reduce our emissions by order 80 to 100% or so over the coming decades. And the question is, should MIT hold itself to the same standard that, for example, the town of Cambridge has committed to in becoming 100% renewable? Maybe there are people from the MIT administration looking at this panel, but why don't you pretend that there aren't?
It's an easy question. It's an easy question. No, it's not an easy question, actually. No, it's in the end, this is an issue. You can see it in our student body. You can see it in our faculty. It raises a lot of emotions, actually, because it's about our home. It's about our planet. It's about our health and so forth. But in the end, it's numbers. I mean, if the numbers don't work out, you can put goals in front of you that say, great, I'm going to be 100% carbon free in 2 years, but you know it'll never work. What's the point of putting that forward? You have to be realistic, ambitious and realistic, actually, at the same time, I think, in this. And that's why realism was in the title of my talk. You have to go through the numbers. You have to see what it is. So does that make sense? I mean, can anybody say right today that they had a zero carbon day? And of course, the answer is that. In fact, this hall, the way we all got here, the food we ate today was all done with carbon-based energy. So that's the reality of it. It's so embedded in what we do, we don't even really recognize it. So, talking about 100% carbon-free MIT is a little bit. It's not within our grasp right now. I don't think that's in my opinion. So there's probably some contrary.
I think the question was about whether we should commit to the goal, not whether we make a promise today that we're at there when we can't do it. You're more likely to achieve a goal if you set it and commit to continuing to try to build capacity and improve and monitor. This goes back, I didn't say anything before, but you talked to, the adequacy of a plan, right? I teach urban planning. We assume that a master plan for a city is outdated the moment it's published. And the point of making a master plan is to use it as an occasion to commit to what you're going to monitor, what you want to learn, what you want to improve, what capacity you have to have. And so I thought the question was about, should we commit to it? The other thing that's a little disturbing about the question and about MIT's way of working is, how could we possibly distinguish what we do from the city of Cambridge? Why do we have a plan that's not totally integrated with and part of the city of Cambridge? It doesn't make any sense. We're part of the place. And we might have some things within that, but we should be full partners. We should be full partners with the city of Cambridge. Everything we do has an effect on everyone else in Cambridge.
So what is a commitment, though, that has no timeline and no dedication of resources to it? It's not a real commitment.
Make a commitment to improve a certain percentage every year, and to commit the resources to monitor, to learn, to make adjustments, to experiment, to invest. That's the commitment I thought was implied by, do you want to aim for that? Do you want to aspire to it?
Well, then they say, let's do that. I absolutely agree. Let's get the numbers and figure out how long it realistically takes with the resources it'll take to allocate it, and then let's get it done. But let's make it realistic and then make it happen. Good, we agree.
Oh, yeah.
I'll just add very briefly my own 2 cents. I mean, one of the things I thought was really good about our proposal at MIT is that this campus be used as kind of a living laboratory for how to proceed on this problem. This is one issue where it could be considered an experiment. I mean, how far can we go on this business of becoming highly efficient, renewable, and so forth? But moving right along, here's, I think, a very interesting question. We heard today from faculty and others at MIT and from outside MIT about work going on largely in the spheres of science and engineering and policy. And the question is, to what extent can the sort of, can humanistic knowledge, or should humanistic knowledge be brought to bear on this problem, for example, here at MIT? And I sort of interpret that question to mean issues like ethical issues. Should they be sort of the philosophy and ethics of climate change be part of an MIT student's education, if I can interpret the question a little bit? And yes, Marcia.
Well, I think we saw a great example of that in this past year with the Pope's stand on climate change as a moral and ethical issue. And I think that resonated with a whole group of people around the globe who might not have resonated with climate change message coming from scientists, but did resonate when it came from someone who was speaking about it as a moral issue because, as the Pope put it, the people who were most vulnerable to climate change were the people who had done the least to contribute to the problem, namely the vulnerable population were the massive number of poor people living in Bangladesh and in the coastal regions of Rio and other places like that that were going to be at risk of rising seas, and they were the group that had contributed least to the release of fossil fuels. So I think that's an excellent example of what the person who put in the question was perhaps referring to.
Yes, Valerie.
Just briefly, I think in the Sloan School of Management, we have a responsibility to teach ethics writ large, not just in specific topical areas. And so I think it nevertheless falls to us to think about how we incorporate discussions of the ethics of climate change, especially as it impacts business decision-making, into cases. And there are some terrific courses offered in the school that are focused more on sustainability. But I think there is an opportunity to actually broaden that focus on ethics and ethics of climate change where it makes sense into some of the more, I guess, shall we say, the core or the more general management courses.
Yes, John.
So I'll just add to that. So I want to broaden the humanistic approach to include creative production, so artistic and literate. So when I started talking to, when my executive director, Amanda Graham, and I started talking about the 5 schools' involvement in the Environmental Solutions Initiative, the second dean that we went to see, the first dean was my dean of architecture, and that's my department, so I couldn't avoid him, but the second dean right away to go see was the dean of the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. And that was very purposeful because I think we understand very well the science challenges, the engineering solutions, the planning and design proposals possible. But I think sometimes we don't talk enough about how artistic, literature has had a huge role in changing collective beliefs and directing willingness to act as a society. And so that's very, very much what we want to engage central to this new initiative.
And the other part of it is just what we've all gone through today. We're humans, and we perceive risk and we mitigate risk in very complicated ways, and that's a humanistic study, and very much. And that's actually, in some sense, what this is about, and maybe why we're in the pickle that we're in.
Okay, so the next question addresses an issue that several of us brought up over the course of the day, particularly Justin Gillis, which is that there are fairly well-documented campaigns of disinformation on the issue of climate, with lots of money pouring into it. And there are many MIT faculty who, as individual faculties, have tried to do what we can to combat that. But the question from the questioner is there anything that MIT can do at the institutional level to combat disinformation in general? I think the question was posed in general, not necessarily confined to the issue of climate.
So I'm going to offer some thoughts again. So as part of the Climate Action Plan, but also our developing strategic plan in ESI, there is a nascent and to be developed, but will be developed, digital platform, a resource, high quality, rigorous resource for providing the very best information on climate change. And again, I want to say broadening to environmental topics generally. So how much of the global urban population is living with unhealthy air, that's topics like that. So it is very much part of what we have in our portfolio of things to do sooner than later. Part of that effort, I just want to say, is to coordinate a number of different outgoing messages from faculty and centers and groups around MIT. And there are a number of distributed efforts and possibly coordinating and then creating a really powerful source of information that would chip away at disinformation. That's just one. I'm not offering that as the full solution. I'm offering that as one thing that we are ongoing. Now, what I'd like to say for any students who would like to join us in this, please get in touch. I mean, this is something we'd like to do right away.
Well, I completely agree that MIT, of all places, should have a centralized place for good information on climate change. I think it's sometimes very hard to, for any institution to systematically go after every time there's a posting of misinformation. But I can't imagine any more powerful statement that MIT could make about the general disinformation that tries to discount anthropogenic climate change, that if MIT divested in fossil fuel companies and had their own climate action plan that included a zero emissions plan in line with the city of Cambridge. What powerful statements would that make? And if that were prominent on their homepage, it would say, MIT's putting their money where their values and where their science is.
I'd like to tie this back to the point that Justin made, though, about the statement of principles. When in community situations, when somebody who wants something to happen starts spreading rumors, puts out information about other people, even brings lawsuits against people who are against what they want to do, and those people don't have the same resources, and they They don't have the experience, and the question is, how do they combat that, what is a form of disinformation at the local level? And the issue is to try to get more widespread discussion in which everybody else can consider the arguments on the merits. And so again, the issue is, do we have a way of saying that there's a set of principles of good science, of ways of addressing public policy in credible ways that we stand for? The issue isn't just to have the counter information. It's to say that that information is derived in a way, presented in a way, supported in a way that violates certain principles. And that what we should stand for is not just we're against that view, but we stand for a set of principles of what makes information valuable for public discourse.
Okay.
Yeah.
On? Yep.
One. The climate action plan that came out last year from MIT was, I think, a very good first step at combating misinformation. Perhaps there is indeed more to be done. There's always a fine line in an academic institution, of course, of saying, you know, well, here is the answer, and you've got to have to be carefully crafted. And academic freedom is, you know, a basic principle as well. So I agree that, you know, we need to combat misinformation and think about ethics and so on, but it's got to be done very carefully to make sure that it doesn't set text saying that MIT is saying what the answer is, leaving no leeway, particularly in an area of science and economics that we're talking about. There's still room for new ideas.
Okay, Justin. Yep.
MIT has tremendous convening power, as we call it now, more than maybe you realize, and particularly so in corporate America. So my thought about this is there may be kind of an opportunity cost in spending the Institute's time and money on the sort of, you know, whatever it is, 10% of the population that's just unmovable and sort of conspiracy-minded on this topic. You got a lot of people out there in sort of corporate America who are, they don't understand the science, they haven't really dug into the science, and they particularly don't understand the sort of business opportunity that's in front of them right now, the sort of money to be saved by cutting emissions and cutting their own energy use, and they don't understand how they would go about that. They don't understand how to do the math of these projects. I mean, I could see MIT convening sort of, you know, 3 or 4 times a year kind of climate boot camp, you know, educate the business community of the United States about this issue, and then go beyond that and help them begin to figure out how do they tackle it at ground level.
Let me just very quickly interject that part of MIT's climate action plan is indeed to hold, as they already do in other spheres, hold a series of kind of mini schools, if you will, here at MIT in Washington for people like congressional staffers, just to bring them up to speed on the climate science, not political, not advocacy, just where's the science at. So I think we're at least planning to do that, and I'm sure that will happen. Does anybody else want to address this issue? So here's an interesting question. As a student caring about climate change, should I spend my time working in the lab or marching in the streets, or both?
So I'm going to start by saying I have all great respect for students who are expressing their views in ways that, you know, previous generations maybe haven't, and I really do appreciate that. I wish the activism of sitting in a corridor were more active. And I say that from a very personal point of view. Amanda Graham and I, with the ESI, we are traveling at 1,000 miles a minute, trying to launch a whole slate of initiatives, from the environment and sustainability minor to new research to bridging student life and the academic world here at MIT. And so again, I mean, I'm not going to answer to the student where they should spend their time, but I would just wish that a student who is here at MIT would take advantage of the extraordinary opportunities to actually activate their intellect and use their hands for issues that they are very passionate about. And if you are one of those students and you're interested in doing that, please come see me.
Valerie.
So I would encourage students, I think, first and foremost, to do that first-rate work that is going to get you noticed and potentially on the front page of the New York Times. And that will get you more attention to your cause and also to your fantastic research and to MIT than spending your time out marching in a crowd. I'm not saying that's not worthwhile, but when you think about the causes that you're choosing to support and how you support them, you want to be discerning. Your time is valuable, and you have a lot to contribute both in and outside of the lab.
I do have a very different perspective on this question. I think when students from MIT get involved in activist causes, they often play a leadership role in providing the rationale for that action and for helping people learn from and reflect on the action that they're taking. And that's a separate and different body of knowledge that people should be working to acquire, that goes side by side with the scientific, technical, social scientific, or design knowledge that they have. It's the language of marching in the street seems to me to trivialize the notion of people committing to taking action on behalf of the environment. And when they do that in a thoughtful way, it completely can change their own understanding of why they're spending the time in the classroom, what they're going to do with that knowledge, and they can be helping to sharpen with all the people that they're working with or taking action with the rationale for what they're doing. So I'm not buying the dichotomy.
Yeah, I would agree, actually. And maybe just quickly to add to that, the leadership piece is certainly one of the most important things that you can do outside of the lab in whatever capacity.
And so you can do both, and it's because we have a different street nowadays. It's not necessarily the physical street out there. It's a e-street, and our students, the students in my own laboratory actually, I know are heavily engaged in that broader discussion of the one of the last speakers was talking about. You need to get into that sphere and have your expertise known. That's what I would encourage of all students. Make the difference in the real world, and then get it the heck out there. Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll go to one last question, which is an interesting one that was raised by our committee in its report to MIT, but we didn't perhaps go into it in enough depth. Is there a point to MIT collaborating on the institutional level, I interpret, with other universities in addressing this issue? Ron.
Why not? As a scientist, I do collaborations, with other universities and labs and so on around the world. We should collaborate, of course. We can't do everything here, but we can have the leadership here for some certain things, and let's do it. But realize we don't cover all of the bases, and so consulting and collaborating with other institutions is part of the natural way a scientist does his work. Huh?
Right. This conversation is active. So I was reminded by Professor Entekabi, I don't know if he's here, that Harvard and MIT had a very well-renowned, very influential water program, and that's lapsed. So the proof of concept is very well proven. I mean, it's absolutely something that we don't have law, and we don't have other fields that are part of the consideration of climate.
But I would like to put a note in that we have different kinds of collaborations, and I would love to see us be collaborating with universities in Africa in a way that was being discussed last year but hasn't yet happened around these issues, in part because, and everyone accepts the fact that it's not as symmetrical, and there's a part of our work to build the university capabilities elsewhere, and then have students from there come here, and then our students go back and help populate faculties there, and we've done that in many places over the years. This seems to be an issue in particular, where international university collaboration, not amongst the usual suspect schools, would have an effect on the issue that we care about in a disproportionate way.
Valerie.
And exactly on that theme, I think our 5-year effort of engagement between MIT and Tsinghua University, which calls itself the MIT of China, has, I think, proven that in the domain of climate change and energy analysis at a systems level, and this was an effort that was launched within the joint program on the science and policy of global change, maybe Ron may talk about it as well, but the idea behind this was really to sit together in the same location in Beijing or in Boston or at conferences around the world and develop articles, research together, which takes time, and it takes difficult conversations about how to work out the sharing of credit for that work, and how to present it, who to present it to, but it can be tremendously rewarding, and I think that's an area where that, as one example, I think there have been many other successful examples that I think can serve MIT well as it decides where to put effort going forward.
Justin.
I'm going to try to sneak in a last word here as time runs out. This Oxford-Harvard project that I mentioned about what should the standards of conduct be for the fossil fuel companies, it is a mystery to me that MIT is not even involved in that. I don't understand why MIT is not leading that effort. The fossil companies, ExxonMobil in particular, are using you as cover. I know this for a fact from having talked. I heard this from ExxonMobil people. Look at this project we're funding up at MIT. We're really engaged in the climate problem. If I were MIT, I'd want to turn that around and say, okay, as a condition of further acceptance of your money, let's talk about how are we going to get from A to Z.
Okay. If it's quick, Ron, quickly.
Yeah, no, it is going to be quick. I just wanted to return to this issue of collaborating with other institutions. In particular, MIT is leading we're building a big climate observatory, very high end, in Rwanda. And at the same time, a new master's degree program in atmospheric and climate science is beginning right now in the University of Rwanda in Kigali. That multiplied many other times with other faculty is the sort of thing that naturally comes to MIT faculty and to faculty at other universities. So we should certainly do that. And my impression of Africa, because I've done a lot of work over the past 5 years in developing this project, is that they are really receptive to learning about the issue of climate change. They know they're going to be affected. They want to know how to adapt. And the very best way to do it is collaboration at that level. And the Climate Observatory, I'm very proud to say one of my doctoral students is a Rwandan, and he's doing his PhD degree, measuring carbon dioxide and methane at this observatory right now. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up this panel with a final question that's rhetorical and requires no response from the panel. Could MIT send a strong message to society by moving its campus to higher ground? And with that, let's thank this very distinguished panel for their contributions here. And so I'd now like to turn back to our department chair for closing remarks.
This is not the end of the program yet, so please, if you can be with us for another 5 or 10 minutes, that would be marvelous. So me too, I would like to thank the panelists for the discussion. I think it's unavoidable and also understandable that the panel was used also to reflect back on the climate conversation that we had last year and also the climate action plan by MIT. But I would also remind the audience again that, of course, the scope of today's symposium was really to add on that and to discuss climate science in particular and the role of basic climate science in the kind of actions that we took. And much of the day we've seen that beautiful examples of that about the science that we do and focusing on what we know about the things that we don't know, the uncertainties, and what kind of things we would like to know better. And in terms of wrapping up the day, I would like to invite Eric Grimson, who I'm very pleased to introduce to you. Eric couldn't be here all day. He just came back here, and I very much appreciate that. Eric, for those of you who don't know him, he's a professor in computer sciences and engineering, and he's also the holder of the Bernard Gordon Medical or Chair in Medical Engineering. And he's here to effectively wrap up the day as a senior administrator of MIT as the Chancellor of Academic Advancement. Eric, great you could make it.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks. I'm between you and heading for the exit, so I will make this short. On behalf of President Reif, I'm very pleased both to thank you all for coming today and to offer a few closing remarks to wrap up what's, I know, been a very fascinating program on MIT's opportunity and responsibility in making climate science the basis for climate action, locally, nationally, and globally. I want to start by expressing appreciation to EAPS. I was going to say the Department of Earth, Atmospheric, and Planetary Sciences, it does not need that explanation, for planning and hosting this important symposium. For decades, EAPS has been a leader in pioneering basic research on climate, and many of you know it well, from Edward Lorenz, namesake of the Lorenz Center in EAPS, whose work laid the foundation for chaos theory, to Nobel Prize winner Mario Molina, who discovered that fluorocarbons were to blame for the Antarctic ozone hole, to Jules Charny, the father of modern metrology, who chaired that seminal 1979 NRC committee report on global warming. I think MIT and EAPS boast a very proud legacy of pioneers in climate science, and we're very pleased for that. As is clear from this symposium, that legacy continues to grow in both climate science and climate action. You've had a chance to hear today from many of today's thought leaders on climate, eminent researchers from across MIT who've shared their work, their insights, and their passion with you, clearly demonstrating that climate science at MIT is alive, well, and sowing the seeds for innovative thinking and action. Perhaps you, like me, are struck by the complexity of this challenge and the sophistication of the efforts to understand what is going on, why it's happening, what we can and should do in response. And if ever there's been a global need for innovative, cross-disciplinary research and cooperative action grounded in basic science, surely this is it. Sadly, as you also heard, and I'm sure you know well, the relationship between climate science, policy, and action is far more nuanced than is generally portrayed in public discourse, certainly in the US during an election year. And MIT does have a clear responsibility to lead by example. To quote Maria Zuber, I understand you heard from this morning, creating knowledge through basic scientific research and effectively translating that knowledge into appropriate action through engineering, technology, and social innovation. I think that's what MIT has to offer to the world. Indeed, it's something that MIT has done for decades in climate science and in many other disciplines. And as many of you know, that combination of both discovering foundational knowledge and bringing it to bear on the world's great challenges is embedded in our mission statement and underlies so many of MIT's contributions to the world over the decades, including past, current, and future contributions in climate science and climate action. While the scale and complexity of this challenge is great, I cannot help but feel incredibly encouraged by how faculty in EAPS, and indeed across all 5 schools, as we've heard today, are now really working across traditional disciplinary boundaries to connect the dots and bring basic scientific research and data to bear on discussions of everything from the social and economic risks of climate change to the impacts of future environmental and energy policy to the promise and the peril of technological innovation, and what it will take, finally, to motivate real action on climate. MIT has a vital role to play in this effort, and we're poised to lead the way with the help of all the people you've heard from today in shaping informed climate action at every scale from local to global. And I have no doubt that today's symposium will generate new collaborations, as you just heard from in this last panel, and I look forward to watching those efforts evolve. As the Institute embarks on its 5-year plan of action, or plan for action on climate change, as I'm sure you're aware, we are prioritizing 5 areas of climate action. In addition to creating new centers to accelerate low-carbon energy technologies, enhanced support for basic climate research will be a top priority. We're also committed to providing our students with the knowledge and tools they will need to continue the charge into the next generation, and to strive to reduce and mitigate the impacts of climate change, globally, nationally, and as you heard, right here on campus. At its core, our plan aims to enhance the coordination, cohesion, and impact of all work on climate from across the Institute, in science, in engineering, in planning, in policy, and in business. And I think today's symposium has been a great step in moving that forward. So again, I want to thank all of you for coming today, both in person and those watching online, our speakers, our scientists, our engineers, our students, our staff, our alumni, and our friends for your participation and your partnership here. Indeed, it's going to take all of us acting together with enduring commitment to tackle the climate challenges before us. And I hope we can all be champions for prudent climate action grounded in basic science as we work towards what MIT has always strived to do, which is make the world a better place for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. So I've very little to add to that except to make a few acknowledgements here. So what we've heard today was, I think, a very exciting program in terms of the science and some of the action plans and the implementations by some of the leaders at MIT. I would be remiss to not mention the students, of course, and the postdocs that work on these things. And I think John Fernandez said it very well and repeatedly that one of the best, maybe most important aspects of the solutions is indeed education. It's such an important topic, and I think it's very important that the students that we train here at MIT, many of them will end up in leaders in academia or government or private corporations, that they know a thing or two about climate change and climate science in general. And so education, I think, is a very important aspect indeed. I would like to take this opportunity to thank a few institutions and centers and people. First of all, even though it was mentioned here, I would like to mention it very explicitly, the support that we had for this, to make this symposium possible, for the Houghton Fund of the Department of Earth, Atmospheric and Planetary Sciences, and also in particular the Lorenz Center, which is co-directed by Kerry Emanuel and Dan Rothman here in the audience. That's a center that is working on finding fundamental research in climate science, working across the boundaries of the departments and schools at MIT. I also would like to thank a few people. There's many people, of course, behind an organization of a day like this. Many people indeed. I mean, the two people that I would like to single out that are here are our Senior Development Officer, Angela Ellis, sitting in the back, who has done major work to make this work happen. And also sitting next to her, Kurt Sternloff, who has not only been very helpful today, but also in the last couple of months, organizing this. Kurt, thank you very, very much for this. Of course, I would like to thank the speakers again. We've thanked them already, but I would love to take this opportunity to thank them again, not only for the inspiring presentations they give today, but more importantly for just the work that they do. Here at MIT, and work on the research that they do, engaging with students and helping this scientific enterprise moving along. I would like to thank the sponsors that we have, in addition to Lorenz Center and Houghton. Many of you in the audience have been very generous donors to MIT, and in many cases to climate science in particular, and I really thank you very much, in particular on behalf of all the students that benefit from fellowships, for example. And finally, I want to thank all of you here in the audience and anywhere in the United States and abroad, via webcam, to having been with us in so large numbers. And even at the end of the day, it's 5:15 now. We still have a pretty packed auditorium here. I thank you very much. I hope you found it all very exciting. I encourage you to stay engaged with MIT and, of course, with our department in particular. If you want to have any more information, then come to see me or Angela, or go to our website. So thank you very much, and I hope if you come from far, you have very good travels back. Reminds me to thank Marcia McNutt in particular as a speaker, to come all the way in particular for this symposium from California, and Jules from New York. So thanks very much, and I hope you have a very good day. Thank you.